I had a very severe problem with alcohol. And then when I saw that in them, when I was desperate to help one of my children, it ruptured our relationship because I was butting in, interfering, insisting, and I went so far as to do, I guess, the unthinkable, I went to the authorities.
And what was that experience like for you as a
father? It was
father?
devastating. It just ruptured our relationship.
Welcome to My Legacy Podcast. One of the things that makes this podcast special is we don't just meet extraordinary individuals. We meet the people who know them best. Someone who has shared their highs, their lows, and everything in between, giving us deeper insight and understanding into what truly shapes who they are. Today we're thrilled to welcome Martin Sheen, a beloved actor and activist. And Martin, you brought someone with you here today. Would you do us the honor to introduce him to our audience and who he is to you?
Well, I'm very honored to be here, first of all, and that you gave me the privilege of inviting one of my heroes. It's John Deere. I think John and I met in jail. I'm not sure. He would. I'm a bit older, but I think of him as my older brother. He's an inspiration. He's a spiritual guide, a great nonviolent advocate, and who, for me, coined the phrase, the nonviolent Jesus. And I heard it in his first sermon, the first Mass that he gave in Washington.
And I understand you prefer John rather than Father John?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, John. Well, John and Martin, thank you both. And to our listeners, this is going to be a little bit confusing because we have two extraordinary Martins here. Needless to say, we got Martin Sheen and Martin Luther King III. So we're going to start, though, with Martin Sheen. And I should say we all know each other very well. We've known you for a couple decades now, Martin. And when you tell the story about your folks, I love how you share your origin and how that almost determined your legacy to become a social justice advocate. Can you take us back a little bit to your parents?
They were my first heroes and my initial inspiration of how to live a consequential life, I guess. That we're all called to be responsible for what we do and what we fail to do, and they were my first teachers. So my father was Francisco Estevez. He was from a very small village in northern Spain, in Galicia, called Bartlett, Salta Revolta. He was raised on the Minho River, which separates Spain from Portugal. So he spoke both languages. He came to the United States with his brother Alfonso when he was 14, so his brother was 16. And they landed at Port of New York and refused entry because they were Spanish, and the Spanish-American War was newly fought, and there was a quota on Spaniards, but not Hispanics. And so they got on the next boat for Cuba. And they spent 3 years in Cuba, and my father worked in the sugarcane fields, and he saved his money. So he worked his way up to Dayton, Ohio. He'd heard that there was a factory there called the NCR, and they were hiring a lot of immigrants. He didn't speak English. So he was in a citizenship class, and he met this young lady from Ireland who was sent to the United States in 1921 on her 18th birthday to kind of protect her life, really, because her family were all involved in the struggle for independence. They were all IRA, and they fell in love and got married. She taught him how to speak English. When they were married there in 1927, and my mother had 12 pregnancies, 10 survived, 9 boys, 1 girl, and I'm a 7th son. I've often said that I had a leg up when it came to social justice activism because to be raised in such a large family, immigrant family, you were either Irish Catholic or Hispanic, and I was lucky enough to be both. So I felt I had a calling. All my life I felt that I had a responsibility, and I was raised in the Catholic faith. Of course, I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in Dayton, Chaminade. It's now co-ed. And so they had a very profound effect on me, the brothers there. And to really express my faith, it had to be expression. It had to be expressed in what we did or what we failed to do. And so I became involved very young and very active. When I was 14, Senator Brown gets a big kick out of the story of my founding a union when I was 14. It's true. I started caddying at a very exclusive private club in Ohio when I was 9 years old. And all my brothers in front of me had carried their. We were just kids, and carrying these bags for these very privileged characters, and so I thought, well, it's time to get their attention. So I formed a union with the lads, and we called a Wildcat strike on Ladies' Day, because we knew the women would not carry their bags on Tuesday mornings.
How did that go? How did it go?
It went very well for us the first couple of days, but then about 72 hours they fired us all, but it was the greatest lesson I could have learned. I to this day I can't belong to anything private. I'm embarrassed at it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you were 14 years old. Is there any particular story from your childhood that would give us and our listeners a window into what it was like growing up in your households and how that impacted? I'm sure with 10 kids, there are a lot of
yeah. In fact, there was at one point, there was still 8 of us in the house.
Your amazing mother.
And my mother, yeah. And she passed away in 1951. So my dad was left to carry the burden. So that was a big, of course, a huge loss in our lives, It's kind of odd. I was an altar boy then, and we were asked, my brother Alfonso and I were asked to serve her funeral, and I thought it just seemed kind of, we'd served funerals before, but never a parent, and I'm glad we did, because it got us so close to the mass, and to the celebration of her life, although it was hopelessly heartbreaking and sad, and you never kind of get over that loss so young.
How old were you?
When my mother died?
Yes.
I was almost 11. It was
So that you and Martin were the exact same age when you all lost a parent.
Wow. Yeah, it makes a profound difference.
No question. No question.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question, Martin. How did the two of you meet?
You got arrested at the Riverside Research Institute with Dan, and then a year later you came back and got arrested. And we went for a long walk that night. We walked all across Manhattan. Do you remember
met
that?
in jail? Which would be interesting.
There's so many arrests, Martin. I've been arrested 85 times. And
85.
Wow.
No, but then there's others that they didn't arrest me, and it's a way of life for me.
85 times for civil
Because of
disobedience.
you and your dad, your family, huh?
It's all their
85
fault.
times for civil disobedience. 85 times.
85 times for nonviolent civil disobedience against war, poverty, and nuclear weapons, all injustices.
So 85 times. How many times have you been arrested, Martin?
Not that many, Martin.
Not many. And you
60
60 times? And Martin, how many times have you been arrested?
Only about 15.
Only 15. Andrea, how many times have you been arrested?
Only one.
Only one.
But I'll tell you that when we were arrested, it was with our daughter, who was 14 at the time.
Yeah.
She was about 14. So it was all 3 of us, and we were arrested just a couple of years ago outside of the White House to demonstrate the need for voting rights. And
I remember that.
because all 3 of us were getting arrested together, I will never forget that morning we had to write in Sharpie phone numbers on our daughter's arm, because she would be going to juvenile and we would be going to jail. And so we had to make sure that she would have a way to call someone, because she couldn't get to her parents.
In all my lifetime, all the thousands of friends I've known gotten arrested, I've never heard the story of a couple with their child getting arrested together.
Children, as you all know, are so resilient.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So she was with 5 other girls that were all under the age of 16, that were, they were very clear on what they were doing and why they were doing it. And they had several opportunities, to say, look, this is not, we're not going to do this, and everyone would have understood. But she was resolute in the why she was doing that.
Isn't that great? It brings to life the Birmingham campaign and having all those thousands of children get arrested.
Yeah.
What's amazing to me is that when you look at that footage, those kids were in jail singing songs of freedom.
Oh, they were experiencing the Acts of the Apostles.
Yeah. So
they were full
after-
of the Holy Spirit
Yes,
and joy.
and I have God bumps.
That's
but like after
what
being
people
like,
don't know.
Yeah.
If you cross the line and take a risk publicly in a spirit of Kingian nonviolence, like Jesus, in prayer, in love, I don't care anymore, no more injustice, no more war. There are consequences. You're going to go in jail, but you're going to discover hope and joy and peace and community, beloved community. Wouldn't you experience? That's what you said, Martin. I'm talking to Martin Sheen about your first arrest. You said,
Martin,
what was your first
It was the
arrest?
happiest day of my life.
Really?
Yeah, because I had always been afraid, and I would support, all the nonviolent social justice efforts, but I never had the courage to cross the line. And I remember I was in New York. I was doing a film, and I had the day off, and there was a demonstration
with Dan.
With Dan, and he was being interviewed for 60 Minutes, and so Mike Wallace was interviewing him on the street, and we were walking along to the demonstration, and then Wallace started talking to me about, well, you could be facing some serious charges here, and I hadn't even thought of that. I said, really?
Don't tell them that, Martin.
And then we got to this. I should explain, John. Please explain where we were and why.
It's incredible.
It's Midtown Manhattan, 42nd
like
Street. Yeah.
42nd Street.
Yeah.
Right there for 50 years is a tall building, and that's the leftover of the Manhattan Project. And on the 10th floor of this building, overlooking all the glittery lights, they're planning post-nuclear laser beam warfare. Until we started going there and sitting in and singing hymns on Dr. King's birthday, Good Friday, Hiroshima Day, and around Christmas liturgically for years. And that would shut down the whole apartment building.
It was the old McGraw-Hill
It was the McGraw
publishing building.
It was called Riverside Research Institute.
Yeah.
You would never
Nobody
know
knew
that.
what was going on up there
And
until we started
It's closed.
hanging out.
We got rid of it.
congratulations, and thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
And Martin, you said it's the one of the most happiest days
It
of your
was
life.
the happiest day of my
Just
life,
tell us
yeah.
about that. It's a profound
because
statement.
I faced my fears, but not alone, thank God. I couldn't have done it alone. And the sense of, my whole thing was fear, man. How badly am I going to get treated? Is there a chance I could get hurt? And then with all these people and they're singing, and then the cops come and they say, all right, you all have like the New York guy, he said, I just got about 3 minutes here, and we're going to start, you're all under arrest, so come on, Chief, you believe in this, get in here. Come on, Father, come on. That was the atmosphere. It was like,
And then what
holy
happened?
moly.
What happened?
Then you
after?
get,
You go going back and forth,
they start lugging you one at a time, and you get a chance to leave, and you don't, and they just take you, and nobody had to be carried, but everybody's singing.
Yeah.
And they're carrying
And
on.
it was all
They're
filmed
Because
on
you're-
60 Minutes.
It was,
It
yeah.
was on 60
Because
Minutes.
you're coming from a place of power, being for something rather than against.
Exactly.
But when you know what you're standing for, and what people I think really get a sense of is what Gandhi talked about, satyagraha, that soul force. Soul force, that is and there's something about that in coming together and standing for not only for ourselves, but for our children, our children's children. It is something that truly is transformative.
Once I faced 20 years in prison. I hammered on a nuclear weapon. So it's real serious stuff. The government considers me as high up a terrorist you can get in the United States because I was a priest messing around with nuclear weapons.
The government was trying to get co-conspirators. And so at one point, and John wouldn't reveal any of the other people that had helped organize the getaway car and all of that, the car that brings you to the thing. And so the prosecutor said, and Father John, tell us, well, who drove you to the demonstration? And John said,
We were driven by the Holy Spirit. That didn't go over well, and I got 6 more months of contempt. 1990, here in LA at the Federal Building, every Wednesday morning, 1,000 of us protested calling for an end of military aid to El Salvador. And Martin and I, that's where we both met Jim Lawson.
Yeah, he was
so
in the-
Jim
he was
is
in the prison.
one of Dr. King's best friends and the strategist of the movement. And after Dr. King died, he moved to L.A., where he was pastor until recently at Holman Methodist Church, and died this summer.
But Martin, your dad, your dad loved, he and
Very close.
Jim Lawson. I just think, particularly since we lost him.
Just this summer.
Just
John,
that
John,
is-
you were at his funeral just
Yeah.
here in town. Yeah.
He was we all know, such an institution,
Yeah.
and understood the theory and practice of nonviolence. But, when you think of these huge, dynamic people that not enough of us know about as a society, because automatically your mind should go to, this is the definition of a giant who will stand up against a system. You have to go back to the Jim Lawsons and others. It reminds me really of something my father went through in relationship to just nonviolence, because he immersed himself in it and never deviated from it. Not sure what would have happened if he chose a different path. What we know is what he chose transformed this nation and the world. And, Dad was personally attacked. Everyone knows he was assassinated, but people don't remember he also was stabbed in 1958 in Harlem with his first book, Stride Toward Freedom. Now, I share this story because it was what he said after he was stabbed that I think is prevalent, and that is that he had not recovered. It was just a day, and if the stabbing had been just a few inches lower, he would have died that day. Well, he was able to be salvaged, and the next day he said, it's the climate of the rhetoric that, and by the way, this happened to be a black woman who stabbed him. She was going to shoot him, but she didn't have a chance to get her gun. She pulled a letter opener out of her purse and stabbed him. And so he talked about the climate and saying, we've got to change the climate. It's relevant today.
Yeah.
We've got to change the climate and the rhetoric.
Since we're talking about your father and nonviolence, I wondered if you could share, since I never got to ask you this, anything about what you learned from him personally about nonviolence. How do we teach nonviolence and live nonviolence? And it seems to me sometimes your dad had it in his DNA to be gentle. For me, it's kind of a struggle. And I did a national convention on nonviolence a couple of years ago. I brought Jim Lawson in, and I said, I want you to talk about Dr. King's nonviolence. And he goes, John doesn't know nonviolence. If Martin were here, he'd say nonviolence is power. We're not powerless. We have the power through nonviolence to change the world through love and truth. I'm thinking of that time you were marching with your father and you held his hand, I read in a book, and you felt the peace that he knew. Can you tell me what you learned from your dad about nonviolence?
Well, I think, first of all, what was learned was this has to be a way of life, a commitment. You can't practice it one day, except for that one time where he became angry with us because we poured water in his ear.
Meaning his kids, his children. Yeah.
And so he was, that's the only time I really ever saw him angry. He didn't quite whip us, but he was on the way.
What you have to elongate. I never heard that story.
Neither did I. And
you got to tell us.
You have to tell us that because you're saying you never saw him angry.
No,
Otherwise,
I never remember seeing him angry. I always saw him. He was always very measured and disciplined, and I think that's what, in relationship to nonviolence, it has to be a discipline because we are human beings. We're going to be upset. We're going to be angry, and as I said, now he was asleep. And he was exhausted. And because our experience...
So you were violent.
Well, yeah, I guess in a way. We didn't see it that way at the time. But our experience was whenever Dad came home, his entire attention was devoted toward fulfilling us as his children.
Yeah.
So it was like, I got to play with them. And this is looking back, thinking about it, because I'm gone all the time, and I don't have a large quantity of time. But the quality of time I want to use to fulfill my kids. So we wanted to play, and he was asleep. So somebody, it wasn't me, But somebody came up with the smart idea, let's pour water in Dad's ear. And then
Can you imagine?
that was not a good experience. It was frightening because, of course, we did that and ran, and he ran after us.
Did he catch you?
Didn't whoop us. He didn't catch us that day. I qualified that day.
But the rest of the time he was gentle and
he was always measured and always the same kind of love that he provided for us as a father, although it was a father-son or for the daughter relationship, he provided to everyone.
just that's the one time in your 11 years you saw him get even like upset. He was gentle, nonviolent.
Yes.
He was practicing what he preached.
Right.
And I think that's what the movement needs today. We all have to reach Dr. King's level of nonviolence.
I think, yes, ideally. But I also think there's a practical and real side of human beings. And it doesn't mean we can't get there. We have to always aspire. Just like, we talk about a perfect union. Well, we're never going to be perfect, but we can always aspire to that.
Martin, we've had this, Martin Luther King III, we've had this conversation that, one time you were arrested and you went to jail right next to people who were, cold hard killers. And John, I know that for half a year you had to stay in prison after one of those arrests. Like, this is like, for our listeners, don't think you're just walking in and walking out. Like, there's real consequences of how you have put your lives on the line in extraordinary ways. And I know Archbishop Tutu, who was a dear friend to, I think, actually all of us here, we knew him extremely well. He nominated you, of course, for the Nobel Prize twice, if not mistaken, and he called you the embodiment of a true peacemaker, which, higher praise, I don't know if that exists in this world. And so you talked about living it. Like, well, yes, there are the rests where you put your life on the line, but how do you live your legacy outside of those situations, the quiet ways, every single day, John?
I grew up, my dad was the head of the press club, so I was very politically aware about the Vietnam War and your father and about Dr. King and the civil rights movement. So I was raised learning about nonviolence. Now, as I'm older, I kind of have a little motto that nonviolence requires three things. First, nonviolence to yourself. Mm-hmm. Really, we have to help one another. No more beating ourselves up. No more. We're all raised in violence. We're all told we're nothing. And to let go of our inner violence and to make peace with ourselves, and then we can model it. At the same time, meticulous interpersonal nonviolence toward every human being on the planet and all the creatures and Mother Earth. I always joke when I speak, we're all for peace and love, but deep down there's someone we'd like to get back at. And that person is your teacher of nonviolence, sent by God to be your guru because they're showing you how violent you are. And you get to practice, like Dr. King, nonviolence with them. But the third, at the same time, you have to have one foot and the bottom-up people power grassroots movement of nonviolence, as Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. have taught us. From Jesus, that the way change happens is bottom-up movements. It's not that we're political, we go public with our universal love, with our vision of the beloved community, with the way of active nonviolence in a world armed to the teeth. This is something I talked at length about with our friend Archbishop Tutu. Well, I'll tell a quick story. I went to see him in South Africa 10 years ago, and there was no hello. He grabbed me by the collar and said, "You better work for justice and peace to the day you die." I was like, I just came around the world to see you, and I go, oh, I hit him. He hit me, and I hit him, and I go, oh, man. And I hit him, and I go, how am I going to do that? And then I said, how do you do that? Thinking, ha, ha, ha. And he goes, he got really in my face, and he said, I cry. And he burst into tears, and he starts telling me, we talk for hours. I've lived my life in grief because the world doesn't realize that God has given us love, just to love one another. And he falls into my, and then he goes, and I laugh. I laugh every day. And you, John, are the most ridiculous person I know. And he starts making fun of me and carrying on, and he's like, doesn't that sound like him? But notice, he's changing the world. He's not angry. He's not bitter. He's not full of hate. He was under death threat even till he died for his opposition to the corruptness in ANC. And I learned a lot there.
Martin Luther King always said, too, that Jesus provided the philosophy and Gandhi provided the methodology.
Isn't that great?
And one of the things I would like to underscore, John, is that at its fundamental bottom line, nonviolence is what Dr. King called also it's about a holy love.
Isn't that great?
And that the fact is that we are all interconnected. So it really is about the acknowledgement that we are all interconnected and that what impacts one of us impacts all of us.
So I studied Gandhi really hard and Dr. King, and they say the vision of truth is that we're all one, all equal. Every human being is a sister and brother. Violence is forgetting that you and I are brothers and sisters.
I need you to repeat that one more time.
The minute I forget, Craig, that you're my brother, actually then I can go, I don't like you, or you're other, or you're nobody, or you're an enemy, or you're not a human being, and I can marginalize you, or I can bomb you and kill you. So it's that critical that nonviolence is a spiritual thing to get to the heart of you, that we remember we're all one and interconnected, as Dr. King said.
How do you build a movement? And I understand that from a philosophical perspective, but from a practical perspective, you guys have been part of these movements, how do you build a movement?
We all need to stand up and take risks, and start small. It's okay. And just know that you're sowing seeds. It may not work, it might work, and we are reaping a harvest we're not going to live to see.
Thank you.
If what we believe is not costly, we're left to question its value. That's the bottom line, I think. So that if we really cherish,
one more time, please.
That was very profound.
if what we believe is not costly, we're left to question its value. And I think that is the core of nonviolence, that it's going to cost you something. The other side of that coin, and Martin King, I wanted to just mention a very, very important story that I learned about your father incarcerated. It's how much he cared for the other prisoners. I don't remember where, he had so many, and he was in there for so long sometimes, but his main concern was, how is so-and-so? And so-and-so hadn't eaten this day, and so-and-so didn't have their pills, and is so-and-so being looked after? That makes the point, I think, of you cannot and you should not do this alone. You prepare yourselves alone in the sense that you have to go inside yourself in order to go out and carry what's inside. And that is your humanity, your compassion, your joy, your realization of a problem that needs to be made public. But if you go alone, don't expect to change the world. But I think you have to do it and not expect to change the world. All of the issues that I have been involved in, I don't know about you, John, but all the issues I've been involved with and all the times that I've made a public statement in protest, not one of them has improved. Not a single one. And so it's a lesson to me that I'm not responsible for making that change. I'm just responsible for showing up and joining the community that continually shows up.
We got to talk about our favorite presidents. President Bartlett. So many people, myself, all of us, millions, fell in love with that character for the hope, the inspiration. How much of it was influenced by you, weighing in on writing and exchanges with the team to make President Bartlett so uniquely also Martin Sheen?
No, I can't take any credit for that. I started with the show with a contract that I would be in the pilot, the first show, and then that in the first season that I would appear maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 times. In those days, we used to do 22 episodes on drama shows, and so that I would be in 5 tops. There would be no first family. The show was going to focus on the staff. These young people, these very energetic, very idealistic young people were serving this very liberal president. So when the pilot was shown to the network, it was NBC, they wanted to know who worked in that office when they showed the Oval. And I only had a contract for 5 episodes. So they said, we'd like you to become a regular, and we're going to make a first family. So I signed on, and I made 2 requests. One, that I have a Notre Dame degree, which I do not have. I never went to college, but I always loved Notre Dame, and I always fancy, that I would have gone there if I had the opportunity. And two, that he would be a practicing Catholic. And the reason I wanted that, because I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm still not getting it right, but I'm still practicing. But so that the president would have to rely on a moral frame of reference for no matter what decisions he made. They would always come from that center of his being, which was a moral sense of himself and in his church. And so they said, no problem. Well, it wasn't a problem until we got to the death penalty.
I love that episode. Oh my gosh. I still tell the story about the counsel that you received and the kicker. Can you tell the story about the conclusion?
When I read the script, I suggested that my attorney, Joe Cosgrove, be the advisor on the show because he had so many cases before the Supreme Court, and he lost every one of them. In fact, the only time I've been on death row was to visit one of his clients. But my character in the episode starts on the evening when this federal prisoner, mind you, the president only has authority over federal prisoners, and it's rare that they're executed, But in this show, we had to show this episode of a guy on death row, and that the president has an opportunity to grant clemency, and he's not going to do it. Well, when I read that, I talked to the writers, and I said, this is totally against my moral frame of reference. You can't do it. And they said, well, we're not going to change it. This is the way. So I talked to Joe, and I said, Joe, you've got to give me a way that I can influence the writers to change this so that I let the guy have clemency and we don't kill him. He said, that's you, Martin. That's not the president. You can go that direction, but then you lose credibility politically because you know that if you give this guy clemency, that you're going to lose political favor in certain areas. And I thought, oh my God, I guess he's right, And so I surrendered to that because it wasn't me. And there was no way I could change it because every now and then I would change certain things and certain scenes, and they would edit them out, So I knew no matter what I said here, if it wasn't going to serve the purpose of the execution, they would edit it out. And so I was stuck saying the rosary for the poor devil, and that's what I did.
Well, and if I remember, and correct me, because it was 25 years ago, of course, the show, but I can still remember scenes from it, was that beautiful exchange about the saying, let me tell you a story about a man on a roof and a flood comes. And that whole exchange of, first the boat comes, hop inside, come with me. And then the helicopter, hop inside, don't worry, God will take care of me. God will take care of me. And every time he waves over in the car, the boat, the helicopter. And then finally he ends up at the pearly gates. And, he turns to God and said, I had such deep faith in you. Why didn't you rescue me? And he says, listen, I sent you a car, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter. What else do you want? I sent you all these things. And the symbols in that episode of the Pope, I remember in that episode, reached out to the president and said, would you intervene? And, all of those conversations. And 25 years later, I can retell that episode because of just how profound it was on so many individuals that you had such a deep moral conversation with America as president and the world for that matter, and that role that you played.
Martin won't tell you this, but you told me, and I'm going to embarrass him, but he finally went to Aaron Sorkin, the head of the West Wing in that first season, and he's going, but who is this guy? I'm imitating Martin. But who is this guy, President Bartlett? And Aaron Sorkin, the famous writer, said, he's you. And I think he's a bit Martin.
Well,
John, I'm curious too, because the themes of the West Wing, integrity, service, compassion, they're reflected in your life's work. How do you see those values connecting to the legacy that you and Martin are building, Martin S., through activism?
I don't know. Martin has inspired me so much, and Dr. King. There's more movements happening now on the planet than ever before in history. Actually, more people know about nonviolence, I think you can make a case, than ever before in history, just as things are worse than ever before. My friend and I, and all of us, I think together, are trying to keep alive the vision of a world without violence and killing and injustice. And that means empowering people to get together and build bottom-up grassroots movements, from Jesus to Martin Luther King Jr., and to do it in all new ways, like Greta Thunberg is showing us, and the Parkland students, and the Black Lives Matter students, and Sister Helen Brejean, the anti-death penalty movement. We're going to go through the list. And together we have more power than we realize. And we're sort of like sowing seeds and trying to encourage each other to not give in to despair or our own powerlessness or fear or us, them, that there's a whole other way, the vision of the beloved community. The outcome is in better hands than ours, in God's hands.
We don't have to succeed.
Right.
We have to be faithful.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Well, what a beautiful idea of legacy. I mean, not what you accomplish in your lifetime, but what you put into motion and how it continues beyond you. I love that.
Martin, you've inspired so many. Now, there's an entire generation, I'm sure you know this, of people who are streaming The West Wing and reliving those memories, especially under the current political climate.
Oh, gosh,
and my question to you is, was there another role that really touched your heart, outside of President Bartlett, another role that really touched your heart that has shaped who you are deeply?
What about the movie Gandhi? Being in that, you played the reporter. What was that like?
Yeah.
Martin, can you tell us about that one?
Well, yeah, I got called to play a part in Gandhi, and the role was of a reporter following him around, particularly on the Salt March. And so I went to India, and we were there for about 6 weeks, and it was a life-changing experience being in the middle of that. The film was one thing, the country is another. India really got my attention. I've never been in the company of so many powerful, powerless people. The poor. As Gandhi said, poverty has not just a look; it has a smell, it has a texture, it has a reality that permeates everything. And so I remember when Emilio, my son Emilio, and I couldn't get anyone else to go. So he took off school and went with me, and he was a treasure. And when we arrived we landed in Delhi, and there was a crowd of people there, and I said, Emilio, there must be some diplomat or rock and roll star on the plane, and all these people. And then we realized they just came to watch the planes land and take off, that they lived there in and around the airport, and that was the case in every major city and every neighborhood. There was a group of the poor lived so close to the non-poor and the untouchables, of course, but the whole levels. There are about 9 levels of societal castes in India, and at that time most of them were still prevalent. And so Emilio would go out every day, and he'd come home with his shorts. He'd give away everything, all his money. He'd keep a few rupees in his socks to get a bus or something. And he kept telling me, you got to come out, you got to come out. And then one day we got an invitation. We went to Bombay, which is Mumbai now, I guess, and we were filming there for a while. And a invitation came to meet Mother Teresa, whom, Craig, I know you've met several times and was a great inspiration to you. I think you were an inspiration to her as well. And I came home to the hotel that night. I said, we've been invited to meet Mother Teresa. I'm so excited. Next Saturday, we're going to take the train down to Calcutta. It's an overnight journey, and we'll arrive in time for the Mass at the community on Sunday morning. I'm so excited. And he said, who? I said, Mother Teresa. He said, why? And I said, are you crazy, boy? This is a living saint. This is a mighty presence in the world. We get a chance to meet her personally. We're going to be. And he said, but why? Why what? What are you talking about? I said, why do you want to do it? And without thinking, I said, because I want to tell everybody that I met her. And I didn't go. I realized that was the only reason I wanted to meet her, so I could brag about it. And so I didn't meet her until about 10 years later with Joe Cosgrove, who asked me to go on a peace mission to stop the first Gulf War. But that experience with Gandhi was, the making of that film was extraordinary. And his performance, Ben Kingsley's performance was, he began to meditate and to become closer to his own spirit, and he wouldn't, how should you say, he wasn't social with us. You know, he stayed in the character all the time, and everybody respected that. When he came on the set, it was like the real guy. You know, the Gandhiji, people would yell. I mean, even at that time, this is in '81, but people thought of him as an embodiment, as a, you know, that they really got the feeling that it was him, that Gandhi had come back in the flesh, and it was Ben Kingsley. He was absolutely brilliant, and I was very happy to be a small part of that show.
After all of the Gandhi movement, that your activism and faith were really kindled.
I did, yeah.
And then you took up the...
I got back into Catholicism.
And back into Catholicism and peace and justice work, and
it started.
You were balancing acting
yeah.
with activism.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
That's what it started, and I used the phrase, "Acting is what I do for a living. Activism is what I do to stay alive," and that's still true. But yeah, it started in India because I realized that at the time I was not a practicing Catholic. I kind of, put that aside, and then I realized that I needed a community. And I wanted to rejoin Catholicism, but not for the piety or the fear of condemnation, fear of going to hell if I got caught, short. But I wanted to come into the church of the peace activists and Reverend King and Mother Teresa, the people whose faith is shown in their works. And so that's the church that I came back into. And so here I am. It's all your fault, John.
So powerful, beautiful.
So, Martin, you've raised 4 children. What do you hope your children and grandchildren remember most about you?
You have children as well, and you can't love one more than the other, but you love them all differently, and because of their needs. And my greatest hope is that they will love each other when we're gone, when Jan and I are gone, their mother, Jan and I. And for that, we have grandchildren and great-grandchildren now. But I see the love. I see the commitment they have to, a moral frame of reference. None of them are Catholic because I didn't raise my kids Catholic, But I see a sense of their humanity and their, best of all, a reflection of who they are is in their sense of humor and in their sense of humor with me. They take great pleasure, to get under my skin, with my ego, I can imagine you pouring the water in your dad's ear and then fleeing. Well, they poured a lot of stuff in my ear too, and I wasn't as nonviolent as your dad, but they rub you the wrong way, but your children, they are a reflection of the very best and the very worst part of us. I remember somebody was once asked, some famous person was asked what they would like to be remembered for, and he said, for about 5 minutes. And I think that's okay. And the old phrase, he that hath offspring giveth hostages to the future. Mm-hmm. We do. It's an act of faith. It's an act of hope.
What would you say is the most difficult time that you've had as a parent?
Dealing with my own addiction. I'm being vulnerable, and they seeing me vulnerable, and my image crumbled. And then when I saw that in them.
Mm. And what was that addiction to you, for those who don't know you as well? And how did you overcome?
My addiction?
Yes.
Yeah, alcohol. Yeah, I had a very severe problem with alcohol.
And how did you overcome that? I
overcome it because I think I mentioned about I came back to the Catholic faith, and I realized gradually, that this was a source of nourishment and grace that I could use to let it go, and I did. And then a friend of mine who was in the AA, the 12-step program, when I was desperate to help one of my children who had a severe problem, he said, you should get in the program. I said, but I'm sober. He said, doesn't matter. You've got to learn the skills.
And how did you use that to help your child?
I wasn't able to, because he had no formal teaching in the faith or any faith, but he had a very generous and a very vulnerable spirit. So I knew that he would not refuse me, but I had to take that step.
And I'm assuming this is Charlie?
Yeah.
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 And what was that experience like bonding as you
Well,
went through
it
that
didn't
step?
start out as bonding. It ruptured our relationship because I was butting in, interfering, insisting that he act a certain way. But I think my persistence had a lot to do with it. I didn't let him off the hook. And I went so far as to do, I guess, the unthinkable, I went to the authorities and said, I know this guy, and he's abusing his probation.
And what was that experience like for you as
It
a
was
father?
devastating because it just ruptured our relationship.
Yeah. And where's your relationship now?
It's like I don't know anyone like him. I go to mass, every weekend, and so he'll call and say something about, well, we got to get. I said, well, I have to get to the. Oh, you're still into that, huh? Oh well, lots of luck with that, But he clowns about it, and yet I know that what he's really doing is he wants to see it in action. He wants to see it in me. I'm the only one.
Wow.
That he's going to find that in,
Wow.
on a regular basis. And the fact that I've kept it up for the last 40 years is means something to him. So I know what he's doing, He wants me to prove it. In some sense, you can't prove your faith, but you live it.
What do you love most about him?
His vulnerability. He was so vulnerable. And he was so... He was so aware of people's needs. I never saw him unkind to a person in need, whether it was a fan or somebody on the set or a homeless person. His compassion, he was an inspiration. I would just stand back and say, "Geez, that's my son. Look how extraordinary he is." I'm 84 years old now, and I'm often asked, do I think about death? And I respond, of course, I think about it every day. I think I've got a shorter future than I have a longer past. I get less frightened of it, although I'm not looking forward to it, but I have to include it in every breath, because these days we live in very, very precarious and peculiar times, to say the least. I love Richard Rohr's comment. He said that we don't go to heaven, we become heaven. My greatest fear is a sudden and unprovided departure, so that I didn't get a chance to tell someone that I loved, how much I loved, and how grateful I was, and that those that I refused to love, that I'm sorry that I didn't, and it was my loss, and will you forgive me? I hope that I have time to do that.
We're talking a lot about, the four of us, the question of happiness versus fulfillment, and how we need to live a life of fulfillment. And the Western concept of happiness often is the next thing, and the next toy, or the bigger car, or the bigger job title, or the corner office. But that doesn't fill us up. Just in terms of what do you have in your heart and that fulfillment that you find yourself in? Because of everybody we've ever met in Hollywood, we've met a lot of people. You are the most grounded, loving, caring, engaged person we've ever met.
Actors are always dependent on somebody liking them, approving of them. So you work, or we spend so much of our lives, not just actors, but a lot of people, striving to be loved, and that's only because we don't realize that we have to learn to love ourselves and all the human things about us, and that. That image of seeing the light in other people. I was on the campaign trail for nearly 3 weeks and going into a lot of very, isolated places. They sent us where, the Kamala and some of the big candidates couldn't go because, they draw such crowds, but they can only do so much. So we were sent in areas where nobody went, and the people were just on fire. And the 3 weeks were just so satisfying and hopeful. I was absolutely certain she was going to win, and she did win, because her whole campaign reflected the character of the nation, not its bitterness, its darkness, its fear, its anger. It reflected the joy. That was the first word that came out of her campaign, was joy. And I saw it everywhere we went, and I was in the battleground states, so-called, And man, yeah, there's a lot of darkness. But when I was doing door knocking in some areas, and we were running into people with the opposition sign on their homes and their cars. There was just that spark of, what's drawing you here? Why are you doing this? And they clearly wanted what these people had, these volunteers, these young people who were so inspired and were canvassing, So I saw a lot of that. And I was grounded in I think we know ourselves when we see ourselves. You see someone that reflects you in a way that draws you to them. You cannot be yourself and not see yourself in others. It happens all the time. That image of seeing the light coming from people.
Martin, as we wrap up, there is no way to bring more inspiration and to bring a little dose of hope than with a classic President Bartlett moment. And many people are feeling a little overwhelmed, a little bit hopeless. And so I'd be curious, what would President Bartlett say to rally them back at this time?
Well, I would refer to a great friend of Gandhi, who was Rabindranath Tagore. We are called to lift up this nation and all its people to that place where the heart is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth and tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sands of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action into that heaven of freedom, dear Father. Let our country awake. Amen.
We have had an incredible conversation with John Deere and Martin Sheen about faith, about family, about nonviolence, about perseverance. And I look back on some of these lessons. I just want to reflect back on, if you want to be hopeful, you must do hopeful things. I love that. I love that quote. And I love how do we live nonviolence? First, we have to start with nonviolence to ourselves. The simple truth, if most of us spoke to our friends the way we speak to ourselves, we wouldn't remain friends with those individuals. How often we put ourselves down and think we're not enough. And then we have to live that nonviolence to others, including those who become our teachers of nonviolence, because they're the ones who frustrate us the most, but they are our teachers in those moments. Thank you to both of you for living your legacies and for showing us how to live lives fulfilled and with purpose.
Oh, thank you very much. A very special time with some very, very special people. Thank you for allowing us to share it with you.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe, share, and follow us at My Legacy Movement on social media. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Listen on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may you find inspiration to live your legacy.